And now a little story from the Appleseed.
Thank you. It was the late 70s. I was 18, standing by the side of a road in Canada, a long way from home. I was wearing a blue circular uncrushable skirt and holding a sign that said, "The Border." I was about to put my thumb out and hitchhike for the very first time, and I was terrified. Now, you might be asking how I got myself into such a predicament. Well, I blame the whole thing on my mother. You see, my mother had a great love of adventure, but when she was 14 and growing up in Liverpool, the Second World War broke out, and England stayed at war until she was 20. So she said her best adventuring years were swallowed up by bombs and fear and rationing, and she was determined to relive them now vicariously through me. So while other mothers were urging their only daughters to read, to study, to go to college, my mother was saying to me, "Geraldine, darling, you study far too hard. Put away those books and go out and party." I wish it wasn't true, but it is. In fact, I am the only person that I know who got a master's degree out of sheer rebellion. So when I was 18, I told her I was going to go to the Olympic Games in Montreal with my boyfriend, and that we were going to hitchhike from Montreal to New York and fly back to England from there. Well, on that occasion, I wanted my mother to be like other mothers. I wanted her to forbid me to go, so I wouldn't have to, and I could tell her she'd ruin my life. But this was my mother, and she said, "Darling, I'll help you pack." So that's how I found myself standing by the side of a road in Canada with my thumb out and my knees shaking. But at least I had my boyfriend standing next to me. He'll keep me safe, I thought. My boyfriend Ivor was very respectable. He was 5 years older than me. He'd travelled extensively, so he explained the rules of the road. "Geraldine," he said, "you always wear good clothes. That way you get a better class of ride. You never get in a vehicle where you're outnumbered, and when you're in that vehicle, you always chat to the driver to build a rapport. And if you do those things, you're less likely to be murdered." Murdered? I have a vivid imagination. I could just see my mutilated, murdered body being tossed out of the car outside some exotic American city like Akron. I prayed, "Lord, please watch over me." And then I wanted to thank every car that whizzed past. But finally, an ancient two-door, rusted-out old Chevy skidded to a halt. Now, I could see through the open passenger window that the driver was alone, which was good. But he had long, unkempt hair, a missing front tooth, and dirt etched in the deep lines of his face. And he said, "I can take you 40 miles. And Ivor said, "Thank you, sir," and got in the back seat with the backpacks and whispered to me, "You get in the front. You're good at talking. Build a rapport." So despite my misgivings, I had to get in. I reached for the seatbelt. It wasn't there. "Oh, it's no use looking for that," said the man. "That dropped off months ago." And he started that car. Well, it looked like a rusted-out old jalopy, but he must have had something powerful under that hood, because we went from 0 to 80 in seconds. And the man only had one hand on the wheel, because with the other he was chain smoking. And he was lighting the new cigarette with the burning butt of the old one. And he didn't have an ashtray. Now, it must be said, he didn't actually need an ashtray, because right in front of the gear stick there was a rusted-out hole that went down to the road. And that's where he was flicking the ash and the still burning butts of the cigarette. Well, I was focused on that hole. I was waiting for a spark to hit the engine and the whole car to explode. And I was just thinking, there are more ways to be killed hitchhiking than I'd ever imagined. When the man said to me, "I've got a glass eye. Would you like to see it?" And he took out his eye and he put it on my shoulder. I froze. I didn't want that eye going into my lap or down by my feet. I didn't want the man grabbing for it, particularly not as we were going so fast. And then I slowly turned my head, and I wasn't quite sure what to say. I mean, what is the protocol when you're eyeball to eyeball with an eyeball? So I turned my head a bit further to see what Ivor's reaction was going to be, but he wasn't in the death seat. His eyes were closed. He was taking a nap. I finally managed, "That's fascinating," and that seemed to placate the man because he didn't say anything else until he dropped us off about 10 minutes later. But I was very relieved that from that point onwards he kept both eyes on the road, even though they were 3 feet apart. I was so grateful to get out of that car, so grateful. I watched it disappear until it was just a speck in the distance. But all that time I felt that glass eye, now back in the man's head, staring at me through the rearview mirror. But then I remembered something my mother had told me while she was helping me pack. She said, "Darling, don't worry." She said, "I've prayed, so everywhere you go on this trip you'll be safe. Because the Lord, He'll keep His eye on you."
Thanks for joining us for a little story from the Appleseed.